I'm so curious with your work as in psychology and the human mind, and what is it that, in your opinion, prevents a person who claims, like I did, to be an animal lover from taking the leap from care and ethics and morality that they extend toward domesticated animals, but and they might even look at cows like, we're driving on a road trip. They're like, look at those cute cows. Oh my God. And then they're stopping at In-N-Out or Wendy's or Hardee's or whatever. Why do you think people aren't able to take that not only cognitive leap, but leap of empathy, I would say? What prevents people from doing that?
If I may, it's like the difference between Jason's brain, because when he heard that, you made changes.
Something clicked.
To the many, many brains that we know that are like, oh yeah. I mean, obviously there's cultural conditioning, but what's as a psychotherapist, like, what's that different in the brain space between Jason and someone else who's like, nah. I mean, we know he's special.
I don't know if you want to go down that road.
In all sorts of ways.
Yeah. Well, I think there is both. I think you have to acknowledge both the cultural and maybe the personal, both, because I do think the cultural and social conditioning is so extensive that we can't minimize that. I think I'll mention what you're saying, Dotsie, about the more personal part of it in a minute. But, Dr. Melanie Joy's work, which I know you both are familiar with Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows. I think she made me aware of how deep our disconnection is as a society, global society, really, at this point, from seeing certain sentient beings as worthy of our compassion. So I think that deep, deep cultural conditioning, it can't be minimized. I think I first didn't really realize how extensive it was. And then over time, I've come to see, because I know so many people who are compassionate. They adore their companion animals and yet don't make this this connection that we're describing. And I know a lot of spiritual people, a lot of people in my own field of work, people that care about making a better world, but there's just some block to this opening up. So I think, there can be different factors. One can be aside from the cultural thing, when you're saying, okay, well, we all have that.
Yeah, because you, Jason, and I all have that same cultural conditioning.
Yeah. So why do some people break through it and some not?
Yeah.
So I don't know if I know all the answers there. A few thoughts that I would have. One is we are all wired to have compassion, but we may be conditioned in different ways in our own upbringing to desensitize to certain things, to not be as attuned. So not everybody exhibits the same level of compassion and empathy, even though we are all wired to some degree to have that. In fact, teachings show that our brains are biologically wired towards compassion and that it's evolutionarily beneficial to us to have compassion. But clearly not everybody exhibits the same levels of that. And I would attribute, that to upbringing, and maybe there are some genetic differences, although I'm not 100% sure on that. There probably are. I would also say, different factors like our personalities. How open are we to being different than other people? Because right now, to be vegan requires you to go against the status quo. And for some people, it seems like the early vegans, it's not so hard to do that. Like something connects and they just do it. But I think for the majority of people, that going against the status quo and being different is harder for whatever reasons, and it's a block.
Yeah. That's just the basis of someone's personality and, all the nuances that make us.
And I just want to add to that, the research shows that those who do not stick to a vegan lifestyle, they start it, but then don't stop it. Some research shows that a large percentage of them, a big factor, are social factors, not wanting to be different, not wanting to be the odd one out at a social gathering, not wanting people to ask questions. So even though, for you or for other people that are vegan, it might not always be hard. I can kind of understand, because it was hard for me at first. I guess I'm sort of a harmony seeker. So there was this balance between the independent part of me that was going to do what was right for me no matter what, and another part that didn't want to make waves. So I can kind of empathize, even though, you wish it wouldn't be that way, because we want to get that tipping point where there's more and more vegans, and it's easier for people to be vegan.
before you jump in with your thought dots, I just wanted to piggyback on that. I feel kind of a mixture of emotions in certain situations. It's interesting when I've gone on like group trips, and I was on one in Costa Rica recently, and it had tremendously great vegan options the whole time. There was a chef there making the food, but it was like I assumed I was going to be the only vegan, and there was that thing in me that happens very rarely of like like I was worried about not feeling as included with everyone being the only vegan, but I wasn't the only vegan. There was someone there who we were making jokes the entire time, like, well, we're both used to being the token vegan, so here we are together. It was just this sort of bonding moment. And the interesting thing is, whatever fear that comes up for me of not being included or not part of the group is superseded by my desire for rebelliousness. I think when you're talking about wiring, I've always been a really rebellious person. And so the idea in the 90s, in my teen years of exploring this was like, oh yeah, like this is counter to what society and culture and religion and everything is telling me to do, and therefore I love it even more. Like the ethics and the morality and the consciousness opening was the bigger part of it, but it appealed to that rebellious part of me, and it still does. Like there's something egotistically, if I may, that's like, I like being a rebel.
Yeah, I've heard that from some other vegans, so I don't know if we do become more mainstream, that may be a loss, I guess.
Oh no, I'm going to become a
we're willing
breatharian
maybe
then.
to face that,
but in speaking about the conditioning, the cultural conditioning, and people who just don't necessarily want to step outside of the box like we do. They just don't. That's not comfortable, especially in a large group setting, and especially if it's like a work setting where they're, maybe trying to impress. They don't want to be weird or different. And I'm also curious about our kind of the squashing of our visceral response to violence, because in last year, we watched 183 billion hours of Netflix. There's only 8 billion people on the planet. And I'm going to say at least 1.5 billion of those do not have Netflix. So when I scroll through Netflix, every other show, if not sometimes every show, is violent. And so I'm just curious if we're just totally becoming immune. So this explanation of what goes on behind closed doors, which is what a lot of the big animal rights, the longstanding, the oldest ones, PETA, MFA, are still clinching to, that if we show them what goes on behind closed doors, people will make a change. And I don't know that that's the case anymore, because I'm concerned that we're just completely immune to violence and killing and horror.
Yeah. And I don't know any hard and fast statistics to, support that, but I would say you're right. My sense is that you're right. Certainly research shows the more we're exposed to things over and over again, the more our brain and nervous system can just be desensitized, brush it off. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. That's going to be a problem if we all just become immune to pain and suffering of others.
Yeah, I think it leads to a question that I've been sitting with, Dotsie, with this lead-in, which is the reduction of empathy that I see in Western culture. And the reduction of empathy that I see because perhaps we are being so desensitized with suffering, not just violence, but real suffering. Whether or not it's what's happening with animals or it's happening with certain world conflicts that are going on between humans. But I think there's this sort of, the term that I've seen is compassion fatigue, but I also see like just a reduction in empathy. The other day I read depending on how you feel about him, we're not going to go down this road, but Elon Musk had a quote the other day paraphrasing that. He feels like there's too much empathy in America. There's too much empathy. And I'm like, my friend, I don't think there's enough empathy here. I think there's been an attack on empathy. And I say this because in your work, Angela, do you feel that empathy is more nature or nurture, or is it a combination of both? Do we come in having an innate sense of empathy in the human spirit, if you will? Are we wired for that neurologically? And or does it really depend on the context of family, culture, the society we're raised in? And I say this because it's an alarm for me. It's an alarm for me because I not only see a lack of empathy toward our non-human brothers and sisters, but the rampant lack of empathy for one another as human beings. It's scary to me. It's concerning.
Yeah, it's concerning to me too. And I've heard that messaging about empathy being a weakness, of the Western world. And first of all, I would 100% disagree. Everything I know from research about compassion and empathy is that it's part of our higher nature, and not only is it beneficial for others, it's beneficial for us. It helps our own psychological well-being. They find that people that have greater empathy and compassion, it's associated with other measures of mental well-being and emotional well-being. So, and as well as relational well-being. So it's certainly beneficial on all other levels: societal, personal, relational. So it's an important part of our wiring. And they find that, with empathy, we can, there's different neurons that we connect with what someone else is feeling. And then there's other things that get lit up. If we move into compassion, then we move into then a desire to want to help too. There is something like you mentioned, the compassion fatigue, and or sometimes called empathy burnout. Some say that empathy burnout might even be a better term, because it's more the empathy where we're feeling with someone, and that overwhelms our nervous system. We're feeling it and we're feeling helpless. And so then we kind of shut down because we don't want to feel that anymore. It's not a conscious thing. It's a reaction. And so, but moving into compassion supposedly actually really helps. And compassion is more of a grounded, like, I want to help however I can to make it better. I think where we also can feel helpless is if we think we're responsible for everything, and then we just shut down because we can't fix it all. So as far as nature or nurture, there's probably a mixture. I mean, our nervous systems are wired for compassion. So it could be, though, that obviously early life experiences or just not knowing how to handle certain emotions. And some of us are more highly sensitive and highly empathic just by nature, for sure. So we have to learn how to navigate that so that we don't shut down.